Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hey folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to have you back. Been a week since we last had a wee chat. Hope you and yours are well. And you're all getting your boosters and everything's fine. So just a few bits of housekeeping before we get on to the main show. And that's fun. If you haven't already, and I keep forgetting to do this, and Techie keeps telling me I should, the subscribe button. If you haven't already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, and it means that you never miss another show. And also, if you hit the like button, that helps us in YouTube and gets us up the ratings, etc. And the last thing is I should mention, we mentioned a couple of weeks ago the Through a Scottish Prism roadshow that we're going to take on the road. We've already got a couple of lacus who have asked us to come and do a roadshow with them. And so if you want it, it's the first week in February. If you want us to come to your lacu, yes group, whatever, and we'll do a roadshow there with the lads and lasses of Through a Scottish Prism. And lastly, this week I'm joined by two of the ladies of the Prism show, because poor old Phil of the SNP, Phil Boswell, has got COVID. He's down with the lurgy, and as we speak just now, Big Ian's on a flight coming across the Atlantic, heading back home for Christmas. So I am delighted to say I am joined by two people who have been on the show before, quite some time, since Denise Findlay back on, and I'm delighted to welcome her, and Yvonne Ridley from down there in the Borders. Ladies, welcome to Scottish Prism. Lovely to see you again. Are you both well?
Yes, I have fighting fit.
Good. Well, let's get fighting fit on here. It's been a heck of a week again. Lots going on, and I really am glad you're here to join me, because you ladies are renowned for all your other attributes of being, good fighters for women's rights. And this battle, it's not a battle, it's a war is going on. And this latest thing about registering crimes that committed by men that suddenly, after arrest, declare they're women, Yvonne, it's not right. Excuse things. If I was to suddenly say, as if I was the chief of police, right from now on, any time a white guy commits a crime, a burglary, let's just say it was a black crime, or if there was a religious thing and I said, well, just blame the Jews, the outcry would be heard from here to Mars. But because it's women, it's allowed. It's meant to happen.
Well, the establishment is making a serious error, and that is they are underestimating women, not just in Scotland but around the world. And we're not going to sit back and take this. Police Scotland, the law is an ass. And I really find it difficult, even after the watershed, to explain how I feel towards Police Scotland over this whole issue. And, it's time that this nonsense was stopped, that women victims were put first. How dare anyone expect a female rape victim to look across the room at the man who raped her, and because he suddenly decided to self-identify as a female, that the victim has to acknowledge that she must refer to the defendant as she and her. It's absolute nonsense, and it's time that this stopped. And it's not transgender people in general who are behind this bonkers scheme. It's trans activists who are quite a different breed to trans folk. A few transgender people I know are absolutely fed up of these fringe lunatics that are exposing them to unnecessary grief You know, they just want them to go away so that they can focus on their life and getting on with, you know, how they want to live their lives.
Denise, it's a nonsense that they're going to say to these men who self-declared, well, you can go into a women's prison. I mean, if we go back to the Second World War, even the Germans, when they were doing their atrocities, I should say the Nazis were doing their atrocities in their camps, they had separate camps for the women and separate camps. They separated the men from the women. And they were barbaric, you know, animals. But here in this so-called civilized society, we're taking male rapists and putting them in female prisons. I mean, it's like, it literally is putting the fox in the chicken coop.
Locking the fox in his chicken coop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, I would say, against their Article 3 rights under the European Human Rights Convention, and, you know, about cruel and unusual punishments, basically. And the other point about it is, if prisoners of war, it's against the Geneva Convention to lock female prisoners of war with male prisoners. So there's no doubt this is infringing the human rights of the women in prison in Scotland. And at the moment, there is males in women's prisons in Scotland. There's also 400 plus males that are categorized as women rapists. So there's over 400 rapists who have to have a penis to rape, classified as women. So the women in the prisons in Scotland I have a feeling it's around 400 or 500 actual women in prison in Scotland. And women in prison tend to be there for crimes that are called acquisitive crimes, which means things like shoplifting and benefit fraud. And they're crimes that, because the woman's poor, and quite a lot of times the woman is doing this to feed her children or to get things for her children. So a lot of the women in there, it has been shown in studies that the type of woman in prison is not the same as the type of man in prison, and the crimes are not the same as the crimes that men commit. And these women often come from a background of abuse. They've been abused by men, and, you know, from male violence. They have had a lot of violence in their past, and usually from poor backgrounds, and therefore actually locking the males in with them is actually very, very harmful for their mental health. And the fact that prison is meant to be about rehabilitation and helping these women, instead the women are being re-traumatized and really have no hope of recovery in prison, because they are confronted. The body reacts when there's been violence against the body or rape against the body, and the body sees a male. The female body reacts as a natural response to trauma. So what is happening to these women is torture, really, by locking them in with male rapists, because many of these women have themselves been raped and abused. And so therefore, what the Scottish government's doing, I would say, is evil. And it's not the only evil thing they do. So they're behaving evilly towards the women in prison. And also, any woman that's been raped, the rape is about power. It's the male power over women. It's power and violence. And therefore, this is giving the rapist more power over the survivor of rape. So when she has to call her rapist a woman, has to say her rapist is a woman, then that's another way the rapist is exerting power over the woman survivor of rape. So therefore, again, it is a very psychologically damaging and cruel thing to do to a woman. And I would say to Nicola Sturgeon and everybody in the Scottish government that brings in this policy, shame on them.
On that, Yvonne, one of the things about politics and being in a political party is debate. You're meant to, with your members, debate, whether it be on the economy, on education, on transport, on anything. However, both the Green Party and the SNP, who are the champions of this, that's the thing that I find the worst, that they are just not allowing any kind of debate where women can bring their genuine concerns and say, well, and let's debate it. that makes it even, I think, worse. Don't you think that's bad?
It's misogyny. It is misogynistic to try and silence women, disregard, airbrush their views out of the landscape. And, I know Patrick Harvey appears to have issues with women. He needs to address that. Nicola Sturgeon promotes herself as a feminist. Well, I would say to Nicola, you're letting the sisterhood down. What's happened to solidarity here? Denise has just been talking about some of the most vulnerable women in Britain today are the women who are in prisons, in institutes throughout the UK. And I just find it so sad that a progressive government like the one in Scotland is going into this medieval mode where men are once again dictating to women. And it really is, I find it difficult. Words are the tools of my trade as a journalist, and I just find it very difficult to express my outrage at what is happening in the prisons. There's also another aspect to this, female prison staff who routinely carry out searches on prisoners as part of their duty. Some of them are reluctant to pat down male prisoners. It's not what they signed up for. And, they're being challenged as well. So it's women running the prisons and female prisoners who are really being made to feel uncomfortable. And if Nicola Sturgeon and Patrick Harvey are so concerned, so genuinely concerned about transgender people, then they should create the budgets to cater for them. But the reality is they couldn't care less. This is a politically driven experiment that they're doing, and it's women who are paying the full price.
Yep, because Denise, it's not just in prisons or rape crisis centres. There's this swimmer, trans women swimmer, who's taken things like 36 seconds off of women's world records. I mean, it's just utter nonsense. And one of the things I remember reading a long while ago, the finding with young girls, particularly teenage girls who are heading towards, menstruation time, see, I even get embarrassed saying that. That's the problem, men. We've got to stop being embarrassed, guys, and we've got to get in this fight, by the way. Is that they can't get them to participate in sports because it's difficult, and we need to get young girls into more sports. What incentive is there for young ladies if they know that the guy's going to run past them at twice the speed? He's going to jump, because even if you have completely transitioned, you still have denser bones and muscle. You still have bigger lungs, more heart. You're going to be able to run faster, punch harder, do all those things. It's just, apart from anything else, it's unfair. It's cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, really, mostly men categories are open categories, so everybody can compete in the male categories in a lot of sports, and it's the women's categories that are for women. And some people say, it's fine if it's just elite sports. We can keep women's categories in elite sports, but let boys play football in the girls' team. But what will happen is women's sports girls will stop taking place in sports completely. Mm-hmm. Because the thing about it is that when you go into puberty, so up until puberty, girls and boys are roughly the same. Girls can run as fast as boys, and girls can fight boys and beat them at fighting. Because I used to fight boys when I was a wee girl.
Yeah.
But as soon as you hit puberty, the problem for the women's bodies is women's bodies, they get weaker in comparison with male bodies. They get weaker and, of course, bleed. So, and obviously, when girls are on their periods, it affects their sporting abilities.
Sure.
You know, not just their ability to do sport, but their sporting performance. So, girls have a lot to face with puberty, and girls that want to play sports have a lot to face. And there's no way a girl is going to turn up every day to be beat by a boy. And that's basically it. So why would women be, like, literally in some cases in the fighting and the boxing arenas, they're letting males fight women. Women are basically punch bags. So literally and metaphorically punch bags for men that can show their dominance over you, men that can beat you at running, beat you at high jumping, beat you at any sport or a team sport. Why would you do that to girls? Why would you let girls feel weaker than boys? You know, why would you force them into, if they want to play sport, getting beat week after week after week? Why would you do that to girls? It's so psychologically damaging to them. So the girls won't turn up, and that's bad for their health. So what you're doing to girls is absolute crime. It's an absolute crime what they're doing to girls in Scotland. You're taking away their ability to compete at sport. They won't be able to compete against the boys. You're taking away their ability to compete. And at the same time, you're doing ridiculous things and not even allowing them single-sex toilets. So girls at school, they're not eating and drinking all day because they don't want to go to toilets with boys, and they're not going to school at all when they menstruate. Now, I'll tell you this, if I had to share toilets with boys, I would not have gone to school on my period, and I would have not ate or drank all day. I would have went home rather than go to share the toilet with boys.
There's already been 2 incidents that we know of in Jedburgh Grammar School and Kelso Grammar School in the Borders where I live, where boys have gone into the toilets and they've waved sanitary towels around. I mean, you know what 14-year-old boys are like. You know, they've got the emotional intelligence of a brick, and there they are going into the toilets, self-identifying as girls, and making the lives of the girl pupils an absolute misery. So, you know, there've been 2 incidents, as I say, that I know of, and I think that once parents find out exactly what is contained in the small print of the GRA bill, I think there'll be universal outrage. But it's very difficult getting the message out there. Yes. I've got friends in the SNP who are clueless. They don't know because the branches are not discussing the issue. Anyone trying to raise the issue is immediately dismissed as being transphobic and being difficult, and it's not a subject that's up for discussion, which is incredible.
Yeah, we've seen the attacks, Denise, on the likes of Joanna Cherry, and this, and the First Minister saying that women's concerns are not valid. We won't discuss it, and it's the same with the school sex survey. Nah, just I know best. Just forget it. We'll move on.
Well, I'm waiting for the next press conference where a journalist stands up and says to the First Minister, "When did you last have anal sex?" And, if the Scottish government thinks that it can ask 14-year-olds these questions, then surely it's okay for the First Minister to be asked this question.
I would like to see that press conference and the reply. I said this in another, the fact if you went to your work tomorrow and went to the HR lady and asked her that question, I wonder, you could tell me, when did you last have anal sex in the last 12 months, how many times? You'd be instantly fired. And the other one was Chris McElhenney was talking about when he was going to bring this up at the council chamber. They said, "Oh, well, yeah, I don't think you could upset and offend some of the members." Does that not tell you that there is something far wrong with giving this to 14 and 15-year-olds? As I said, I was doing I was on the other side. I was gamekeeper turned poacher there with this week midweek, and it's true. 14-year-old boys asked with peer pressure, "How many times have you had sex in the last 12 months?" You know, the data itself is going to be rubbish. 112 times. I had sex with 84 different women, is what 14 and 15-year-old boys are going to say. And so the information they get on this school sex survey, it's not worth the paper it's printed on, is it?
I think the problem, there's problems with the questions that's getting asked, but there's also problems with the data handling. Mm-hmm. The actual, Neil Hanvey has written to the Information Commissioner's Office and asked them to investigate. I actually read the privacy notice that accompanies this, and I would say, and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not the Information Commissioner, but it doesn't look legal. So, for example, the children, when they fill this information in, normally consent has to be active. It's not an opt-out. You're meant to say, yes, I give consent, and you're meant to give consent to how your data is processed. But this data, and it's the answers to these intrusive questions, it is linked to the child. The individual child is identifiable. And not only that, when the government, so the local authorities administer the test, so presumably I think the local authorities are probably the ones that would be sued or whatever, because they administer it. But the information goes to the government, and the government will be able to share that data. Now, another thing it says linkage. Linkage means they can cross-reference the data that they get with other databases. So that means the child's identifiable, and Nicola said that they weren't. When she was asked the First Minister's questions, she said that the child wasn't identifiable, and that's a lie. It is a direct lie. The child is identifiable because when they get the data, they have the candidate number, and they can cross-reference that with any other database. Yeah. The other thing it says that the data will be shared by, for example, but unspecified third parties. So we don't know who they're going to share that data with. Then it says to the the child. Now, normally in data protection, you own your data. So you're allowed to ask for that data to be deleted. Now, in this case, the child isn't allowed to ask for it to be deleted. And you're allowed to prevent it being processed, which means you can object to it being shared with a third party. Not in this case, it says they aren't allowed to ask that. And do you know this? The child isn't even allowed to ask what data is held on it. So the subject access requests, the child isn't even allowed to know what data is held. That data is held forever. So the answers the child gives at 14, when that child is 24 or 26, those answers can be used for any reason. And the child has no reason to object. It can be profiled. It can be used in automated decision-making. If the child went for security clearance, it can be used for any reason at all. So any child that takes part in this survey, is given information hostage to fortune. That information be shared with anyone for any reason for the rest of that child's life. And who knows what consequences that information the child given at 14 could have on the rest of that child's life. It will follow them everywhere. So I would say to every parent, opt your child out. If you're a responsible parent, opt your child out. And I would say to every child, you can opt out. You don't have to answer these questions. You can opt out. So you can say to your teacher you don't want to answer them. But every parent should opt their child out. If you are responsible, if you care about your child's future, opt them out. And that is not even asking about children getting asked about sex or under the age of consent. But really opt the child out, because we don't know what effect that data has. You've got you as parent and your child has no control over that data, none whatsoever.
So, Yvonne, women's rights are being eroded. The children's rights are being trampled on, I would say. What's the next step for the ladies to fight back, and the men? What's the next step in this fight?
Well, we need to create public awareness, because I would think that about 80–90% of the public aren't really aware of what's going on. All they know is that J.K. Rowling has upset a group of trans folk because she's transphobic. And that's about as much as people actually know. And they don't realize how this whole thing is going to affect their lives. I mean, Denise has just said, how is this data going to be used? This government might be quite benign, but what sort of government are we going to have in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, that could use this information in a really sinister way? So there are all sorts of, we need to make the public aware, because at the moment they're just being bombarded with COVID statistics, and everything's about COVID and everything's about the pandemic. And as soon as you start raising issues like the trans issues, it's let's just all focus on COVID. This is the big problem, and we should be able to juggle many different issues at one time, and this is a serious issue. And the very fact that SNP branches up and down the country are stopped from discussing the whole issue is incredibly sinister. And when I hear politicians like Mary Black, who I've had the utmost respect for, loved her opening speech in the British Parliament, full of admiration for her. But when I hear her say that feminists like me need to be re-educated, I think, you cheeky young whippersnapper. You're still wet behind the ears. I have fought, probably with Denise and hundreds of thousands of other women, for women's rights for decades, so that she can stand up and articulate her fears and hopes and desires the way that she can. And for her to turn around and say that I need to be re-educated, that is, it's a knife in the back, and the blade is being twisted. Yeah, it's disgraceful.
It truly is. And you've actually got me rather uncomfortable, because I'm going to be talking about COVID shortly. Because it is, there are other things going on. And this week was quite eventful in numerous ways. And it brings me on to, on quickly to COVID, because as we know, this new variant, the Omicron, is running rife. I mean, there was 93,045 cases of COVID yesterday in the UK. But there is a school of thought that says that this is a milder and sort of, it might actually be the silver bullet to get out of this, but that's not what I want to discuss. I actually, doesn't happen for me very often, I had a tad of sympathy with the First Minister, just for a second, when she was trying to get, she's saying I think she wants to close down the hospitality sector, but she's got no money, because we've got to go cap in hand to Westminster. And I don't know if you saw the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drayford, the Labour man, talking about, this union of equals where Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales can ask for money and get told no, but when England wants or needs, they just get, but we can't, and that's got to stop. And he's now trying to do a deal with Plaid Cymru. and he's talking about Labour going for independence. But, Denise, there is not a chance that ANRAS or the Labour Party in Scotland would be like Mark Drayford and say one word against the union or accept that it's an unfair situation where Nicola Sturgeon can't, his hands are tied behind her back. But I blame her. That's her own fault. That's another story. We'll come on to that. But the Labour Party up in Scotland won't offer to fight against the UK, will it?
No, and I think Labour has made very big tactical errors since 2014, and they don't seem to be able to undo their tactical error. There was a good opportunity for them after the referendum in the Vow to actually embrace the softer edges of the yes movement, shall we say, and say, you know, we'll get you your more powers and trust us, and yes, we promised you and we'll make it happen and we'll stand up for Scotland. And they could have done, you know, a stronger for Scotland and standing up for Scotland, and they could have, as I said, embraced a lot of people in the yes movement on the Devo Max bus, so to speak, you know, and kept up their advocacy of Devo Max. Instead of, they kind of went for hardcore unionism, which hasn't served them well, because they will never out-Tory the Tories, no matter how much they try. The Tories are going to win that. So I think they've always done that, and now they can't seem to get themselves back into a situation where they stand up for Scotland. And that's where they would need to be able to rebuild electoral support. And they're not there. They're not anywhere like there. They never stand up for Scotland. And they've made this mistake now for 7 years, and I don't see them changing.
More than 7.
But what I'm saying is, prior to 2014, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister up to 2010, and particularly there was Labour presented themselves as champions of Scotland. They did the Constitutional Convention that the SNP didn't take part in. They brought in the Scottish Parliament and the referendum for the Scottish Parliament, and they were often seen as advocates for Scotland. But gradually they lost that. Gradually, I admit, as soon as Salmon came back in 2004 onwards, Salmon started moving the SNP to be much the champions of Scotland. So even if you were a Labour person, you would look at the SNP and think, oh, they stand up for Scotland, you know. But since gradually that ebbed away, and their deal with the Tories in 2014 finished them. But they could have tried to recover post 2014 by becoming big advocates of Devo Max, but they didn't.
Yeah, she did. But here's the thing: Nicola Sturgeon's given them every opportunity, Yvonne. I mean, during the Holyrood election, she was talking about how she could work with Annis and Labour. She couldn't work with Alba and Independence Party, and she's done it again. The headline in the National today, and I read, Sturgeon calling for independence parties must unite against the dreaded Tories. And she said, you know, and Labour must join in. She didn't mention Alba. She hasn't outstretched a hand to him. So when she says independence parties must unite, who's she referring to, if not Alba? She's not held out the hand to ISP as far as I know. So I'm kind of confused. Can you help me?
I think she has to put her big girl's knickers on and grow up and acknowledge that Alba isn't a blip. It's here to stay, and she is going to have to work with Alba. One thing that, time and time again, that Alex Salmond has shown is that when it comes to reading the rooms for elections, he is the master. You know, his strategy, his tactics, his understanding of the electorate is exceptional, and he knows how to work with the D'Hondt system to maximise the opportunities, and the flavour of each election is quite different.
Yes.
And, no two elections are the same, so no two strategies are the same. And I think that, Nicola must know this. She was mentored by him for decades. And, whether she likes him or not, she has to respect his wealth of knowledge when it comes to election strategies. And if, for instance, everyone had listened to him in this last election, Holyrood would have been stuffed by now with independence-minded MSPs.
Yep. But
So,
they didn't.
And of course, that moment is gone. The next election that comes up will again have a different flavour to it. It'll have it will need a different strategy. And this marching people up and down the hill with high expectation of Indie Ref just being round the corner has killed people's desires and enthusiasm.
For sure.
I'm afraid that that's all that she has achieved so far. I would love to be wrong. I would love to be wrong. We all would, yes. And it's how much do we want independence? And I'd be prepared to work with most people to get independence.
I agree. I mean, I this week, Denise, I wrote a blog on unity. I actually called for unity, and I was immediately attacked by Pete Wishart, I should say, immediately. I offered to debate with him on routes to independence. No, he attacked me. Unfortunately, Angus Brendan McNeill stepped into the breach and we did that. But since I wrote that blog, I have come under the attacks I've received from SNP and alleged SNP people as well has been quite extraordinary. Really vicious attacks. It would take, as Yvonne's alluded to, it would take Nicola Sturgeon to put on her big girl's pants and say, we need to work together with our friends in ALPA, with our friends in ISP. We're all on the same side. Let's draw a line under everything and let's get Scotland. That's what she needs to do. I'm not saying that's what she will, can, or is capable of doing, but that is surely what she needs to do.
Well, there's really zero chance of her doing that ever. I don't even think it's worthwhile talking about. I think we need to face facts. And pleading with Nicola Sturgeon to change is not going to work because she can't change. There's a few things here. Firstly, the SNP, there's a quote about power, and it's power for its own sake. I know that's all that matters. You've seen the pictures that she released just this week of her with her eyes closed in these saintly poses. Her interest is being First Minister. Her interest is power. And the SNP as an organisation's interest is in power. So it's in maintaining power. No organisation in power wants to share power with anyone else. And therefore, they're not going to entertain ALBA because it would mean sharing power. And this is their fear, because they at the moment have the pro-independence vote. They have that platform, they have it. So going into elections, they've got this guaranteed pro-Indy vote, and they don't want to share that with anyone because it would dilute their political power. So there's just a natural politics of a party that doesn't want to share power with anyone else.
Well, they're sharing it with the Greens. They're sharing it with the Greens.
The Greens are acceptable because the Greens are not a threat. They're not a threat. They're not a threat to their power. They're very much a junior partner and will remain like that. The trouble with them sharing it with ALPA, Alex Salmond is a threat to their power. ALPA could replace the SNP. They could replace the SNP. So what would they do then? They already have 2 MPs that defected and a number of councillors that have defected to ALPA. If ALPA had any, and that's without ALPA having electoral success. If ALPA has electoral success, other people, there might be more defections. So Alba is a very big threat to the SNP. So just from that point of view, she isn't going to work with Alba. But there's a more fundamental reason that she's not going to work with Alba. And that is because, let's just be honest, Nicola Sturgeon is not a leader that wants independence. And she's not a leader that's capable of gaining Scottish independence. And she's not a leader willing to do it. There can be a number of reasons for that. But if we just look at our actions, we should realize, given the best possible circumstances for independence, with the Tory government under Boris Johnson and Brexit, she has not advanced the independence cause an inch. She's got no strategy that's likely to work for independence. She's got no policies for independence. She's got no money to fight an independence campaign. Furthermore, she's completely in hock to the British state because they helped her stitch up Alex Salmond. And everybody knows that. Everybody should know that. So you think about it. There's no chance of independence with Nicola Sturgeon. No chance.
Yvonne, are you as optimistic as Denise? Do you see Nicola putting the hand out and trying to unite the clans, for want of a better phrase?
Well, there is strength in unity, but if Nicola isn't going to deliver, then I fear that Angus Robertson, who has been groomed to take over from her, is probably less inclined to deliver independence as well. And the reason that I say that is that there's a little known story of Al Jazeera's documentary, The Lobby, where they sent a reporter undercover to penetrate the pro-Israeli lobby to find out how much influence it had in Westminster. And during this undercover operation, Al Jazeera didn't have that much interest in the SNP, but their undercover reporter did speak to somebody from the Israeli embassy who was later expelled and sent back to Israel. And he said that Angus Robertson is our friend, and he'd spent 9 hours with him preparing him for this trip to Israel with a few other MSPs, and the relationship was quite telling. Now, the pro-Israeli lobby is very much against Scottish independence. And if you have people in the Israeli embassy saying Angus Robertson is our man, he's a great guy, then that will give an indication of where he's going to come out and exactly what he's going to do as a future SNP leader. It doesn't look good at all. And I'm just basing this on, as I say, this little known fact that came out, and the story was eventually published by Al Jazeera's online English site, and it was quite astonishing. But it didn't gain that sort of public attention that it should have. And something interesting happened just a few weeks ago when the Skojek, which is a Zionist-leaning organisation in Scotland, made an astonishing attack on Nicola Sturgeon. accusing her her support for Palestinians as tantamount to desecrating a synagogue. It was, and I interviewed Mick Napier from Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and I said, "What is this all about?" And he said, "I think that the Zionists in Tel Aviv are lining Nicola Sturgeon up for the Corbyn treatment." So, you know, I don't think that the Scottish voters are as fickle as English voters, but I do think that this is an area that we should be watching closely. And, you know, whether she likes it or not, she's creating enemies in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. And I would just say, watch your back.
It's Denise, Yvonne's alluded to it there. Things are happening down south. I mean, North Shropshire. I mean, this is a Tory seat for 200 years, and they lost it to the Liberals because a lot of the Labour voters did what Nicola Sturgeon referred to as gaming the system. But she didn't have anything to complain about with the North Shropshire. No. But what they're talking about down south now is that the Liberal and the Labour Party are going to come to possibly to some kind of pact to get the evil Tories. And in Wales, the Labour Party are in conversations with Plaid Cymru to similarly get the Tories and have some agreement. Now, we know when they come north of the border that Labour, Tory and Liberal will never, ever, help the SNP or ALPA. They are more committed English nationalists than some of the Tory party. But the Tory party and the British state at the moment has got to be its weakest ever.
Yes.
We should be taking advantage of this. But we're not. We're sitting doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly. We've been sitting for 7 years, and it's going to be a decade because we're not going to do anything for another 3 years. And we'll be a decade after Brexit because come 2026, we'll have done nothing. And I take issue with your sympathy for Nicola Sturgeon because
I said it was only for a nanosecond.
I have no sympathy for her whatsoever. The reason that we do not have money to fight the COVID pandemic is because she has not done anything with the mandate that she promised us, that she would use the mandate. She didn't use it. Now, what she's saying to us is we've got to wait till the end of the pandemic. So she cannot complain about anything Westminster does during these years of the pandemic because she is the one that's told Scotland and told the world that we are staying under Westminster rule to the end of it. So if she's put us under Westminster rule, then what Westminster is entirely her fault. Everything that Westminster does is entirely Nicola Sturgeon's fault because she's the one that says we have to stay under Westminster rule throughout the pandemic.
But
I don't think there's any way she can be as angry as she likes. She can rant at journalists if she likes. She can rant in the Scottish Parliament. She can have a go at the Tories. But ultimately, this is on her head. Every single bad consequence of Scotland being under Tory rule throughout the pandemic is entirely Nicola Sturgeon's fault.
Yep.
It's her fault entirely. So she cannot blame anybody else. She can't pretend.
She'll have a good bloody try. That's her.
She can try, but she cannot. It's her responsibility. She needs to hold herself accountable for her horrendous decisions and her terrible advice to Scotland and the fact that she has failed Scotland. She's let us down.
This pandemic is going to go on for years and years to come. You know, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, if there is a light, it's probably a little man with a torch saying you're not even halfway through yet. You know, this pandemic is going to last. I suspect for the next 5-10 years in one form or another.
Yeah, and we're meant to be staying under Tory rule or under Westminster rule until the pandemic's over. So by that logic, she's telling us Scots to trust the Tories. The Tories, the broad shoulders of the UK, are going to get us through the pandemic. This is a leader of a nationalist movement.
Yeah.
She should be we should have been independent by now.
I agree.
The fact we're not is entirely down to Nicola Sturgeon, entirely down to her.
Well,
because
it could be argued.
Lies to the Scottish people over and over again. She lies to people. She tells them that now is not the time. Now is not the time. We'll wait until we know the terms of Brexit. Now is not the time. We'll wait until the COVID. We'll wait till the pandemic's over. She's always moving the goalposts, moving it out. So she's had the mandates. She's failed to use them. This is down to her.
Yeah.
Well, it could be argued it's down to us because we have put up with it. And, today is the anniversary of the Tunisian revolution, where people faced down live ammunition, tear gas, rubber bullets, you name it, when they stood up to the dictator in Tunisia. They had everything thrown at them. And it took them, and I'm just looking at my notes here, it took them 27 days to get rid of the dictator.
Yeah, but the thing
Why? Because they took to the streets and they marched with banners and placards, and they didn't go home until the job was done. And I think that this is a lesson for all of us, that it's quite clear we're not achieving anything under the SNP government. So the next time we go out and march, maybe we shouldn't go home. Maybe we should go to Holyrood and sit in and dig in until we get what we want, which is our referendum.
There is some form of plebiscite, something. But there's another one coming down that's going to, you keep thinking there's got to be something, the final straw that breaks the camel's back. And while Nicola and others in the Scottish government and the Welsh government were trying to get extra money out of the Treasury, our own money, but trying to get England to release some of it back, it turns out that Rishi Sunac was in California talking to United States healthcare bosses. Now, why was he doing that? Why do we think he was talking to them? Was it to improve the NHS? Was it to sell it? And that will have consequentials and it will affect Scotland. Will that be the final straw, Yvonne?
Well, it'll be too late by then, because the Westminster government will defang the Holyrood Parliament, and then they'll just come in and the NHS will be gone and it will be too late. And this is, we are at reaching a crisis. We're coming to an abyss, and we really, I think that people have to come together and take it in their own hands and seize independence, because we're not going to get it from Westminster ever, and we're not going to get it delivered by Nicola Sturgeon or the man who's been groomed to take over from Nicola Sturgeon. And as I said, if the Tunisians could achieve it in 27 days, then, sure. And these people were paid with their lives. The blood was flowing in the streets. In next month it's coming up to the anniversary of the Egyptian revolution, and to get rid of their brutal dictator, their pharaoh, it took them 17 days. Why? Because they went and marched, and they went into Tahrir Square, and they stayed there until they got rid of Ehud Barak. And it's not just in the Middle East. Look at the Romanian Revolution. The anniversary was on the 16th of December. The Romanians did it in 9 days. Now, these are people who are facing brutal military dictatorships. And, we don't have that.
No, but the problem is what we do have, Yvonne, is we've got Strictly Come Dancing, and I can't turn up for a riot this week because Strictly's at the semi-final, and then I've got the Great British Bake Off. The British in general are shit at that sort of thing. The French don't take any nonsense or don't take any, but we're like, no, there's a football match where the Champions League's on Tuesday night. It really is. We're apathetic. We're absolutely apathetic.
But I don't think that is this. I don't think this is the problem. The problem is the leader of the Nationalist Party is not a fighter and is not fighting. He's lying down, waving the white flag and doing nothing to protect us. Now, if you think of 2014, then we were fighting. We were fighting. We were having all sorts of demos and all sorts of grassroots groups sprung up, and we were active. But what's happened since is we've been continually dumbed down, and the leader. So it's what you say, Yvonne, is correct. We didn't need to do that. We don't need to go and have bloodshed or anything. We can do all this democratically. But what you need is a leader of the Nationalist Party to fight. To actually fight for independence, or a leadership to fight for independence. And while we've got this pretendy devolutionist leadership in the SNP who are not fighting for independence but pretending to fight, then all the people watching Strictly are thinking, oh, it's fine, Nicola's got it, there's a secret plan. Well, she's told us to watch Strictly and we'll be independent in a couple of years. So we'll watch Strictly and we'll be independent in a couple of years. With that leadership, that's our problem. It would be if we actually had, like a bad Tory leadership, and we had all the independence movement. Then we could protest.
We do need unity.
I don't think people realise how close we are to losing the NHS. A couple of weeks ago, I got treatment for hearing problems, and I was given some hearing aids. And if I lived in America, this would have cost me thousands and thousands of dollars, and probably wouldn't be able to afford it. And people in America, there are diabetics who are trying to stretch out their insulin medicine because they can barely afford to pay for it. All the things that we get from our NHS, and it really is in danger of going. And if it goes, once something goes, it's very, very difficult to bring back. And we are really coming up to this abyss, and the Scottish people have to wake up. Even if 200 or 300 of us just camped out in Holyrood, not even Sturgeon is going to want to see Police Scotland batter us with truncheons and haul us
Don't be so sure. Don't be so sure about that. I mean, she tried to imprison a man falsely. She's imprisoned a journalist.
Yeah.
She's stopping us protesting. So no, don't be surprised. Ladies, we're running out of time, but just on what you said, there are two things. 2014, Philippa Whitford was warning us that the English NHS had 5 years and it was going to be gone. It virtually is gone now, and that we would be 5 years later. And that's coming to be. But in America, there's 600,000 bankruptcies a year by people with medical bills. And that's coming to us if we don't, as Yvonne says, do something about it. Ladies, for the final couple of minutes, as usual, the time flies in when you're having fun. And it has again, you wouldn't believe it, we're just a few minutes short of an hour since we started chatting. On a lighter note, Yvonne, what's your big plan for Christmas? What's Santa bringing you?
Well, I'm a Muslim.
Oh, that's right, I've forgotten.
But my family isn't. So, we'll still exchange presents. And I've ordered a turkey crown of meat instead of a turkey. Because I don't know why we have turkeys. It's very dry meat. It's very difficult to cook. And I will be having turkey on Christmas Day with my family.
That's nice. What about you, Denise? What have you got?
Well, in a week of
See the snow?
in a week of almost unremitting gloom, a few bright spots with J.K. Rowling, but maybe the laugh of the month. I mean, I haven't laughed as much for a very long time, reading things online. So I've decided not to have Brussels sprouts with my Christmas dinner. Instead, I'm going to have, in honour of Pete Wishart, I'm going to be having carrots.
Oh yeah, lots of carrots. Lots of carrots.
Oh, that's what the carrots was. I hadn't heard of Pete Wishart. It somehow escaped my radar.
Trust me, you're missing nothing.
Well, and then I saw his name and I thought, I must look up this guy. And I went to look him up and I've been blocked by him.
And I was not blocked by him, Yvonne.
He loves me.
He sounds quite an interesting character. He was a rock star in a previous life.
No. You've been misinformed. No? He was the only man in the band that they didn't give a microphone to.
Right.
And because they weren't daft. And as I've said, maybe Nicola Sturgeon should do the same and get him to get silent because he doesn't help. But ladies, muchas gracias, as we say here. But with a better accent, and I wish you and your families, Muslim or Christian, whatever, or atheist like me, I wish you a lovely Christmas and a very prosperous New Year. And to you, my viewers, I hope you've enjoyed the company of Denise and Yvonne as much as I have. And to yourselves, there's one more show before Christmas and one more show before the end of the year where the Right Honourable Alex Salmond will be my guest. So until I see you again, please, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.